Have you ever wondered why some regulations just fail? I mean, we create rules to solve problems, but a lot of the time the problems stick around. It's a massive challenge. Well, today we're going to dig into a really powerful answer from a paper by Robert Baldwin and Julia Black. It's called Really Responsive Regulation, and trust me, it offers a completely fresh way of thinking about how to make rules that actually work.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with what's called the regulator's dilemma. It's the core problem they're up against. Then we'll look at a classic solution, the enforcement pyramid, and see where it starts to break down. That'll lead us right into the main event, really responsive regulation, and a much smarter framework for putting it into action. And of course, we'll wrap up by talking about why all this theory actually matters in the real world.
All right, first things first, let's really get a grip on the challenge here. To make it real, let's think about something we all know is a problem. Illegal overfishing. We have rules against it, right? So why is it still so incredibly hard to stop?
I mean, really think about it. We have clear laws, we have agencies. Why is this such a persistent, difficult problem to solve?
Well, the simple answer is that the scale of the problem is just immense. A regulator is basically like one person in a tiny boat trying to police a vast, chaotic ocean that's just full of places to hide. That's the dilemma they're facing every single day.
And this is where you see just how deep the rabbit hole goes. You're trying to watch the entire ocean for boats that are always on the move. The catches are seriously underreported, so your data's garbage. And to top it all off, you often have multiple agencies accidentally working against each other, creating what the source brilliantly calls regulatory white noise. It is quite literally a perfect storm of challenges.
Okay, so to deal with messes like this, regulators came up with a much smarter strategy than just, punishing people or trying to persuade them. It's a really influential idea called responsive regulation.
The big idea here was to finally end that old debate. Should we be tough or should we be cooperative? This theory basically said, hey, why not be both? You start by trying to persuade someone, but you always have a credible threat of punishment in your back pocket if they don't play ball. The key is that your response is tailored to their behavior. This was the big question that Ayers and Braithwaite wanted to answer. It's not if you should punish or persuade, but when. And their answer was this simple, elegant, and really powerful model. And here it is, the famous enforcement pyramid. You always start at the bottom, at the cooperative base, with persuasion. If a firm still doesn't comply, okay, you escalate to a warning letter. No change, you move up to penalties. The regulator only climbs this pyramid as far as they absolutely have to, which makes the response proportional to what the firm is doing.
Now, the pyramid was a huge step forward. For sure, it's still used by regulators all over the world today. But, and this is a big but, as powerful as it is, it has some pretty serious limitations when you throw it at the really messy problems of the real world.
Right? What if the company actually wants to cooperate, but they just don't know how? Or what if the risk is so huge, so catastrophic, you can't possibly start with a friendly chat? What if you got 5 different regulators all trying to build their own pyramids at the same time? This is exactly where the model starts to show some cracks.
The pyramid has some critical blind spots, and maybe the biggest one is this. It responds to a firm's cooperation, not the actual harm being caused. So you can have a really cooperative company that's causing massive environmental damage, and they might get treated better than a slightly uncooperative company with a tiny issue. And for those huge, catastrophic risks, you just can't start at the bottom. Once you use those big, punitive tools, you can destroy any trust you had, making it impossible to go back down the pyramid to persuasion.
And this slide really shows the fundamental leap we're about to make. The old model, responsive regulation, it asks one simple question. Is the firm cooperating? But really responsive regulation keeps that question and then adds a whole new layer of awareness. It asks, and what's the company culture like? And what's the political situation? And, maybe most importantly, are our own tools even working?
So this brings us to the main event, really responsive regulation. It's a much more robust framework, and it's designed specifically to handle the kind of complexity that makes the simple pyramid crumble.
This is the perfect way to think about the shift in thinking. The solution isn't to just add more scarier steps of punishment on top of the pyramid. The solution is to zoom out and actually see the entire landscape where the problem is happening.
So what is it exactly? Well, it's a strategy where being responsive becomes multidimensional. The regulator isn't just reacting to what one company does anymore. They're actively listening and adapting to everything. The company's internal mindset, what other agencies are doing, the political climate, and even their own performance.
So this wider lens means looking at a bunch of different dimensions all at once. It still includes the old pyramid, that's the compliance response part, but it adds so much more. It looks at the firm's culture, or its attitudinal settings. It pays attention to the institutional environment, which includes all those other regulators. It understands the logics of tools, knowing that a fine works very differently from a public shaming. And crucially, it forces the regulator to be responsive to its own performance and to change over time.
Okay, this sounds great in theory, right? But how does a regulator actually do all this? Well, the paper breaks the entire process down into a really practical 5-step framework.
And it's a continuous loop. You have to first detect the problem, then you come up with a response, choosing the right tools for the job, then you enforce that response. But it can't stop there. You then have to assess if it's even working. And finally, you have to be willing to modify your entire approach based on what you learned.
In that first task, detection, a responsive regulator doesn't just look for violations. They ask much deeper questions. They ask, are we seeing the hidden off-screen problems, like those underreported fish catches? And how might the culture of this industry, or even our own culture as regulators, be creating blind spots for us?
Now, for response and enforcement, the questions get even smarter. It's not just about picking a tool from the pyramid. It's about asking, do we even have the right tool for this job? Or are we missing one? Are we using a tough strategy that's accidentally sabotaging our efforts to cooperate? And this one's huge. How will this specific company's culture react to a fine versus a public warning? One might work, and the other could totally backfire.
And finally, you get to the engine of learning, assessment and modification. This is where regulators have to ask themselves some really hard questions. Like, can we even measure our own success? Is our data, like in that phishing example, completely unreliable? And maybe the most important one, are we flexible enough to admit when a strategy is failing and actually change course? This constant learning loop is what makes regulation truly dynamic and, well, really responsive.
Look, this framework is about so much more than just government agencies. It's really a blueprint for intelligent problem-solving in any complex system. Because at its heart, this is a universal challenge. Whether you're managing a team, launching a new product, or even just trying to fix a bad habit, we all face complexity. And the question this framework leaves us with is a really powerful one. When your first attempt doesn't work, is your instinct to just push harder with the exact same tool, to just build a taller pyramid? Or do you have the wisdom to stop, zoom out, and use a wider lens?